Hi, Kevin. Well, President Trump, he's directed a flurry of new immigration measures, and we'll get to all of those. The latest, pausing all visas for Afghan nationals. Now, in between rounds of golf and celebrating the holidays with his family, the president has launched a major review of the country's immigration and vetting system, blaming the Biden administration for past policies. Last night, the State Department announced it has immediately paused visa issuance for individuals traveling on Afghan passports. While the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services said in a post on X that asylum decisions would be paused until, quote, we can ensure that every alien is vetted and screened to the maximum degree possible. The director of the agency said he was directed by the president to conduct a full-scale, rigorous re-examination of every green card holder from every country of concern. And the president himself has pledged to permanently pause migration from third world countries. And we did work to clarify what third world countries and countries of concern mean. According to the USCIS, the 19 countries on the map are included in this group. The Department of Homeland Security said this week the states have never been higher for what they're calling re-migration.
The nonsense that the left gave us with this Operation Welcome Allies. Look, there was no vetting. If you think there was vetting, I have a bridge to sell you.
And Kevin, the president said on Truth Social that the reason for all of these changes was to give the U.S. immigration system a way to fully recover. As for his schedule, he is expected to stay here with First Lady Melania until the end of the weekend.
Danamarie, thank you so much. Appreciate that. For more, let's bring in former Deputy Assistant AG and Cal Berkeley Law Professor, the great John Yoo. Great to have you with us, Professor. I just want to begin by asking you about, again, this Autopen circumstance. It's a very big storyline we've been following throughout the morning and now into the afternoon. Let me share a little sound. This is James Comer. He's on Hannity, and he's really talking about the excessive use of it and how that was problematic. Listen, get your reaction on the other side.
The legal peril here isn't the fact that the Autopen was used excessively. It's the unauthorized use of the Autopen by a president that was clearly in mental and physical decline, and his administration tried to shield that cognitive decline from the American people.
Non-compos mentis is what we keep hearing. I'm not so sure, though, this is laid out specifically under the law. Is it? And if so, is that where Stephen Miller and the other folks at the White House are drawing from?
Yeah, great to be with you, Kevin. Happy Thanksgiving. The Autopen is a symbol of the bigger problem, which under the Constitution, it is the president who we all elect and who exercises the constitutional authorities of his office, like defending the nation's security and enforcing the law. It doesn't deputize any other staff to sign pardons, to issue military orders, et cetera, et cetera. So what the Autopen symbolizes really is, did these staff take advantage of President Biden's declining mental capabilities to essentially seize the powers of the office and exercise it themselves? The Autopen allows us to see exactly what was going on. Because if there were pardons issued, for example, by these staff people without President Biden's conscious consent, without his order, then I think they are invalid. And if they are invalid, that raises questions about the other decisions that President Biden made during his term.
People are even asking the question, if he's called in to testify about this, and you heard President Trump make the comment that if he lies about it, he'll be charged with perjury. Is there any reason to believe, Professor, that Joe Biden and his state really understood the thousands of pardons that were issued in his name?
Fair question, Kevin. I don't think that the Justice Department should go after Joe Biden.
Yeah.
He might not have the mental state, as you said, to commit perjury. Who the Justice Department should be investigating are his aides, the chief of staff, the White House counsel, cabinet secretaries who covered up his mental state and, where I said, exercising perhaps the powers of his office. And you can do this, right? What President Trump could do is send back to jail one of these terrible criminals who were pardoned by President Biden, allegedly, and that person would try to say in his defense, I've got a pardon. And then the court and the Justice Department would get to test factually whether that pardon was really done by President Biden or was done by staff people using this robotic pen.
And I think that's exactly where this is headed. Real quick, I want to get you on this Truth Social post by the president. He says this: I'll permanently suspend migration from all third world countries to allow the U.S. system to fully recover. And listen, let's be honest about this, Professor. After what happened over in Washington, D.C., a lot of people feel like it's time to step back and hit the reset button. Does the president have the right to do that?
Kevin, I was involved in the Bush administration at the time of 9/11 after we have very valuable Afghan allies. But it seems clear that there were mistakes made in bringing people back from Afghanistan who fought with us. And the president, under the Constitution, as interpreted by the Supreme Court, gives, and Congress has given the president the power to close the borders in a national security emergency. And I think an attack on National Guard units qualifies as that. Second, the Supreme Court upheld this authority. Remember when President Trump started his first term, he also did something similar, and the Supreme Court upheld it in a case called Hawaii versus Trump. There should be no legal doubts about the president's ability to do this.
Well, and a lot of people, quite frankly, especially in Washington, but I think broadly speaking around the country, feel very strongly that, yes, maybe it is time to take a hard look at the system, enhance the screening processes, and maybe just hit a pause, at least for now. Professor John Yoo, thank you so much for your time today. Happy Thanksgiving weekend. Have a good one.
Thanks, Kevin. Great to see you.
Hey everyone, I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.